I'm just going to go around asking everyone to introduce themselves. So Mickey, if I could start with you, please.
Sure. So my name is Miki Hirasawa Ashton. I currently head 3M Global Sustainability Engagement for our public affairs function. I come with 25 years plus of marketing experience, mostly in B2B. The past 7 years, I have been working at 3M, leading marketing operations development, digital sales excellence, branding communications across MEA, and integrated for EMEA. And now I take care of engagement, which is pretty much marketing and strategy, but because it's for sustainability, we have to use a different name. So that's how complicated our company is. I am passionate about building purposeful platform for brands, product, and people to shine. And I am definitely keen to learn more from the experts today. So there you go.
Thanks, and thanks for joining from the US, where it must be pretty late for you, I think.
Yeah, it's midnight. Yeah. It's okay.
Oh, God. Gosh, ouch. Carolyn, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Hello from Singapore. Hello, Keith. Good to see you again.
Hello.
So I'm speaking from Zendesk, where I'm the head of comms for APAC. And I've come to this role with about 20 and a bit years of experience in comms, a lot of which was spent on the agency side of things and in technology PR predominantly. 3 of those years was spent in Mumbai, Abhinav, where I lived there for a bit. It's amazing, one of my favorite cities in the world. Yeah, so a lot of that experience in technology, a lot of that in B2B, some B2C experience as well. Before I came into comms, I was a lawyer, so I left that profession after 3 years, but that does color my lens a little bit, especially from the risk mitigation perspective. So crisis comms has been a big area for me as well, as just the regular day-to-day. But that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Carolyn. Abhinav?
Yeah, thanks, Arun. Carolyn, a lawyer who's doing communications is a deadly combination. Yeah, as we know, I think the foremost communication department, their relationships with the legal department tend to be, well, let's just say, full of a little bit of friction. So, knowing someone who gets the other side, I'm sure you take advantage of that. And Mickey, very good evening to you. I've got a great line for you to start with. 3M doesn't mean you work at 3 a.m. Sorry. Just in the morning. My name is Abhinav Kumar. I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer of Tata Consultancy Services. I am in Mumbai. That's our headquarters, and I have my office here. But otherwise, I live in Brussels in Belgium. So I might compete with all of you for the longest commute, perhaps, in this group. But looking forward to the discussion. I think we always, Arun, again, thanks for the invitation. Always insightful to hear from PRovoke and be part of these communities which you build, in which we share thoughts and ideas. This one is a really interesting and pertinent one, because as you said when you started off, from B2B marketing, influencer marketing as a sub-element of it is not something which I think naturally came to B2B. But today we're seeing a lot more use of it. Perhaps not yet as sophisticated as consumer industries do, but definitely I think it's an interesting topic, and good to see the statistics from Ogilvy. Shout out to them. They are a global PR partner, so always we appreciate the intelligence and counsel they bring in. I think that was interesting to see that such a large amount of B2B companies already using it. Even more interesting that, 93% are looking at increasing budgets on it at a time where, budgets are not naturally increasing, right? I think most people are keeping it flat, or in many cases, they're seeing some pressure downwards as well. So that's good. That's interesting to see that this category is being prioritized at the moment. So looking forward to the discussion with all of you.
Yeah, indeed. We'll get into all of that, I think. Keith, over to you.
Yeah, just echo that. Nice to meet everyone, and to see you, Mickey, and Carolyn again. I want to sort of echo that thing about, it's great we're talking about B2B influence. I would say we've done a few things on it, and kind of I'm really curious on how we could do more. Really, is kind of I think it's at that point for me anyway. Yeah, I like everyone else here, 20+ years in comms, PR, done a bit of journalism, worked around the world, mainly actually in tech PR with Microsoft, from Dublin to Korea and then down to Singapore. Tried to set a clean tech practice up at Edelman many years ago. One of my clients, Black & Veatch, who I now work for, was one of the few people who had there was sort of a tire kicking kind of sector. Black & Veatch then were a project client, and then sort of poached me, and I've been working with them ever since, 14 years. We are, let's say, in the high consideration B2B space, right? So we do, we work on, say, small sort of consulting, for us, small consulting projects of, say, $1 million, but all the way up to taking on risk for $500 million to $1 billion projects, right? So we focus on sustainable infrastructure. So we're either decarbonizing the planet at scale or protecting against the impacts of climate change by and large at scale, right? My role is I head up marketing for the business outside the United States. We're mainly a United States company, so it sounds more impressive than it is, but we have very few resources outside the United States for sort of marketing and comms. So yeah, and then final thing, I'm president of APAC-D as well. So I've been working with Arun as our secretary, who's doing a great job and continues to do so. So thank you, Arun, and looking forward to you hosting this session.
Great, thanks, Keith. And last, but by no means least, James.
Hi guys, great to all meet you. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, I'm the head of influence at Ogilvy for Asia Pacific. I've been in the B2B space now for a decade. I transferred over to the world of influence about 5 years ago, which is when I joined Ogilvy. And I've just seen the world of influence just boom and blossom as brands have understood the full value of it. And as part of that Ogilvy journey, I've been lucky enough to work with some of the biggest brands in the world, creating their influencer strategies and executing them. TCS being one of those. Used to work on TCS when I was in the London office. So yeah, I have worked on thousands of influencer campaigns with thousands of influencers. So hopefully you can add a little bit to this discussion. Importantly for this B2B discussion, I've led Ogilvy PR's launch of business influence as a new capability about 18 months ago now. We are the first agency to develop a specialism in this space. I think still the only one. And as part of that, like Arun mentioned, we've launched the first research paper in this space of B2B influence. If you're going to launch a practice, you need to do some strong research in it, first of all. It was a huge piece. It was global, and 5 regions across Asia Pacific, 550 senior decision makers from some of the world's top businesses. So hopefully that provides a really good foundation for this discussion going forward. But yeah, great to meet you all, and looking forward to it.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I have to say I found the research study really interesting, and if you do want to pull out any of the findings or mention them at any point during the discussion, please feel free. So yes, we started off with this with the findings that 3/4 of the B2B marketers surveyed are now actively employing influencer marketing, which I think may surprise some people who perhaps view influencer as something that's more popular in the B2C space. But I think perhaps the best place for us to start this discussion is to talk about what is a B2B influencer, because it's not necessarily, I think when we talk about influencers, we automatically start thinking about people on TikTok and that kind of thing. Maybe that's the case for B2B influence, maybe not. So maybe if I can start with you, James, and ask from your perspective, how do you define a B2B influencer in today's digital landscape? Is it just someone that's making a lot of noise on LinkedIn, and has that kind of concept changed much over the past few years?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, particularly to define the difference. And the way we look at business influencers or B2B influencer marketing is the practice of brands partnering with individual influential individuals or key industry figures, subject matter experts, to create added value and beneficial impact on customers' brand perception and purchasing decisions. So this, and businesses can partner with influencers in multiple of ways and for multiple reasons, largely at the moment articulating their business capabilities and benefits from an authentic and credible perspective to new audiences. I think business influence isn't new. I think businesses have been utilizing it for years. The evolution of that has developed since social has played a much bigger role. And it has evolved in a couple of ways. The first is scale. Like, platforms have given us this huge scale, accessibility to new types of influencers, new types of authority, but also getting into specifics. Typically in the old work, it used to be, B2B influence used to be hyper-local, a hyper-local exercise when either it was a one-on-one introduction or potentially small gatherings like a talk or a meeting, where your audience might be up to 100 people. Whereas digital platforms give you this mass of wider accessibility to the audience, but give you a much more specific choice of influencers where needs and requirements from businesses are so specific now. You can find and partner with experts that have a very nuanced and targeted. So yeah, it has evolved from that small target audience to a much more mass accessibility.
I'm on mute. Sorry, I'm happy to direct questions, but please feel free, all of you, to just jump in with your thoughts and comments on any of the things we're discussing. So yeah, I guess one of the things from James's response there is the change in scale, which I guess some of you can speak to. But yes, curious to hear all of your thoughts in terms of what is a B2B influencer in today's digital landscape, and how many of you are kind of actively perhaps working with. So Abhinav, perhaps I can come to you next.
Yeah, happy to share a perspective from our part. So if you look at the business we are in, which is in the technology consulting and services business, it's a very large and complex business, right? We're a fairly large company. We're $30 billion in revenues. We have 604,000 employees in 55 countries across the world. So it's a massive, well spread out business. But from a client and a point of view, it's a relatively simple business, right? From a targeting point of view. So we work with 1,400 customers across the world. They're all enterprise customers. I often joke that you take out a Fortune 500 list, I pin it to my wall and throw darts at it at a dartboard, I'm going to hit a client, right? So we work with all the big companies in retail, in telecom, in banking, etc. Within those, so there's 1,400 we work with, and maybe there's another 1,000 whom we yet don't work with and we'd love to work with, right? So if you take the entire set of companies we will in the long term work with, there are about 2,500 companies. Within those companies, in each company, there's 7 or 8 people who have an effective role in the buying decision, right? Whether in renewing the business which we do with them, or in considering us for new business, right? Whether it's an existing customer or new prospect. So if you do the math on it, 2,500 into 8 means there are 20,000 people across the world who effectively hold the destiny of our company in their hands in terms of, whatever, whether we make the 30 billion we make, what we increase it to, or whether it comes crashing down is up to these 20,000 people. So what James said is pretty relevant for us. We've been in the influence game from the onset, right? Because if you look at what works in the buying process with these enterprise customers we work with, and they're usually very senior level executives. The chief information officer, chief technology officer, many places the CEO is involved. Definitely the CFO in terms of looking at returns of their investments in technology. So I think the part of using influence in terms of references is really vital, because whenever one of these clients makes a decision to work with us, it's significant work, it's strategic work. In many cases, and today, given how important technology is and how central it is to the operations of any business, in many cases they're betting the company on selecting us to build their next build a digital bank or to help them navigate the AI wave, etc. So when they build their evaluation of our expertise and what we bring to the table and all of that, but a large part of it is also them talking to someone we previously worked with, right? So using the influence of our previous clients as references, talking to those who track this industry. There are a lot of analyst firms here, firms like Gartner, Forrester, IDC, etc., who are experts who track the industry and look at the capability of companies. They publish charts and reports on capability and things like that. So they've been the traditional influencers who, in terms of the buying decision, for sure. But I think more and more, when we look at it from the comms piece and gaining mind share, look, we've looked to see that who influences these C-levels, right? I think at one point of time, we've done a very elaborate study on Twitter. I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to call it Twitter anymore, X, which in which we looked at some the personas we're selling to, and who do these people follow and engage. And interestingly enough, what it kind of pointed out to was that I think quite like the Japanese economy, it was all interlinked, right? They would, for a CIO, there'd be other CIOs who influence them. So for us, I think traditionally speaking, that inside the business world, who was somebody's reference point? It was very, very important. Of course, taking a cue from the consumer side, on many other parts, we're doing different things. Like if you look at it, a large part of our marketing portfolio is invested in running platforms and marathons. And we engage a lot of our clients and other audiences into that. Now, all these C-level executives, from their professional point of view, sure. When they're looking at advice or who they get influenced by, it typically ends up being someone in the business world. Often, they look up to political leaders, surprise, surprise. There's these surveys of CEOs and who do they admire. I think the top 10 list often carries 4 or 5 politicians. So in terms of defining events and things for them, right, getting them into a room for a breakfast or something, it often helps to get regulators and others in the room too. But on the running property side, as humans, when they look at their non-professional side, their wellness and all of this, there's a very different range of people who they look up to, right? So that's the new category we've been really, from our side, taking on. I'll give you a very quick example, and then I'll, then we can move on the conversation. Is we signed on with this lady called Des Linden, who's a very accomplished athlete in the US. She was the winner of the Boston Marathon. And with her, we are building something pretty interesting, which is the world's first digital heart. So what we've done is we modeled her heart into a virtual heart. And every time she goes for a run, her performance is tracked, right? Not just the basic stuff of heartbeat and HRV and all of that, but actually tissue performance, blood flow, etc. There's a variety of different measures. And through that, as we get the data and more insight from it, she's going to get real-time insights on improving her performance, while she's running. But the end game of this is to actually consumerize this technology in the end. So all of us will have our digital heart sitting on our iPhones, which is tracking its performance, and then giving you tips. It would say that, Mickey didn't sleep well this week because she was up on a call late at night or whatever it is, which means your risk of a heart attack has gone up 5%. So please take care of yourself, or something is not right. I think we think you should go for an ECR, for a cardiogram test, etc., etc. So literally, it can save lives. So for that aspect of it, we are engaging a range of athletes like her and other things to work on that. So it's a mixed map. But I think what James said at the start, influence is really important in our whole marketing effort. Using influencers, and the definition of influencers for us, it's a broad range of very different personas.
Can I just build on?
Oh, sorry, I was going to.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the digital hearts example, Abhinav. It kind of reminds me of, and kind of go back to what James was saying earlier, reminds me of sort of some of those cool sort of consumer PR ideas I worked on when I first started my career. Like we did the testing of the dunking of McVitie's biscuits and how long, what's the cutoff point for that. But just really good influence type, word of mouth, generating activities, which I think is really interesting, because the question, who are B2B influencers, and I think that's still an open question, right? In terms of it's still a maturing sort of sector, but certainly like we are in the game of influence. And to echo what you were saying, I think there, for me and for B2B companies, that the buying center is essentially becoming more complex, and so having the ability to scale, and access these more whoever these B2B influencers be able to scale to reach those other people, because in the past I think there was a more concentrated buyer center, and I look at my company where our salespeople have evolved quite a lot. They used to be very, very relationship based selling, and we're trying to kind of evolve that into scaling that in different ways using digital technologies, and how do we approach different clients and so on. So I'll kind of hold my thought a little bit there, but it's just interesting how the whole sort of industry is really kind of evolving from a sales point of view, and then how you access those key decision makers who are broader. We're looking at a couple of things. So we work with sort of a technology evangelist to keep it really simple, from a paid influencer point of view. So we, openly will, employ a paid tech evangelist who is going to some sort of key industry conferences, and he'll interview a few of our people through his network. And we kind of go, hey, over to you. You want to talk about security at utilities? Here's the guy. Do whatever you want, kind of thing. And we pay appropriately, and then he communicates appropriately. We're also looking at other things in terms of like advisory boards. So if you think from a B2B point of view, I think, other CEOs and how you co-create, we're talking about like a digital world, or how you bounce ideas off CEOs, you test your strategies, but also then get inputs on and get insights to their businesses as well. So that's kind of another kind of maturing area where how do you engage even offline with, let's say, influencers, because as Abhinav said, it's actually, he was really articulate in terms of, I was kind of jealous in terms of how he's able to go, there's 20,000 people who are making the decisions, right? It's quite a small world, and it gets quite niche quite quickly, and it is quite interconnected. So how do you crack that? It's difficult.
I was gonna.
The other thing. Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was going to add what you articulated really nicely there is the word you used is it's very strategic. Our decisions of working with talent, and what you'll notice is influence is typically looked at on a scale, micro to mid to macro to celebrity. That's not how we see it. As what you've just talked about there is around every decision maker, you have different types of influences on their decision. Like a policy maker is an authority in making sure that you're doing things right, but businesses are going to tell you that your operational side. Technical people are going to tell you how to implement it. You need all of these around one decision maker, and working with influencers shouldn't just be one. Pick one and create some content with that person. Create a bank of talent that can answer all of these different questions for one single decision maker. And I think that's a really good point.
So if I may, so 3M is a very diversified company. So we used to have healthcare. We don't have it anymore. We just spin it off like a few weeks ago. But actually, because of that, and to your point, James, what is interesting is, so we used influencer marketing for B2B heavily on healthcare. So that's one of the things that is easy. Why? Because it's around patient care, and patient care needs to have more people involvement, even with the doctors or the clinician that we work with, right? It was always a bit trickier in the industrial B2B context, to be honest. And that was a major issue when we were actually trying to get the buy-in to use social media influencer in the past. So we have actually started using them 2 years ago. For us, influencers are just paid influential voices to promote or advocate, like products and solutions. And in the B2B context, I think you mentioned that we actually rely probably more on consultants or actual more subject matter experts. So this is exactly what we do too. I think other than this, Abhinav mentioned that, yeah, it is curious to see that everybody wants to actually increase, like the spend in influencer market, in B2B influencer marketing, where we all know that, well, at least that applies to 3M as well, our budgets are a bit shrinking. But I was reading in the HubSpot that the market is valued at $14 billion for 2023. And they actually kind of estimate that that would be increasing this year. So I find it really interesting. For me, I feel that a B2B influencer is done better by leveraging employee advocacy. Why? So maybe it goes against, what you're saying, but I think if you want to have authentic voice, a better voice, I would rather an agency to focus on the very people, so R&D people, R&D people, away from our CEO and MD, because anyways, they have all the full agency attention, but we do have, like those mini rising star that can actually engage stronger with, their network, right? And it's more in regards to the quality of the network, but also on the relevancy of the network we're trying to reach out to. Does it make sense, right? So that's pretty much it. So it's really around the rise of employee engagement turned advocacy, or what we call the rise of micro influencers, right? So you can actually leverage more with perhaps less budget, more budget in terms of, like paid media behind those employees. But I think it works a bit better. It empowers the employee better at a time where we actually restructure a lot. And and also it actually create more authenticity in the brand voice. So that's kind of what we actually figured out, because we needed to go more into subject matter expertise on certain things, such as abrasives, right? Or things that are less interesting, such as, I don't know, glass bubbles. And we figured that nobody else than us could actually explain our product better, but we needed to kind of empower those people who can talk about it in a more, I don't know, public ways.
I second that, Nikki. That's a really good point.
Interesting point. Yeah, sorry, I'll make it really quick, Keith. I think it's an interesting point you make on, we probably have a new term for it, the internal influencers, right? If I look at our internal communications team, they do have a list of our own colleagues who have outsized followings inside the company. So, being a company with a pretty large employee base, they regularly tap these people who, I think they will list about 30 or 40 people, that when there's a message to be played out inside, often they engage them with it, because they have these large followings, not on internal company intranets or whatever, but even on outside channels like LinkedIn. We have a colleague who, for example, is a bit of a renaissance man. He does stuff on he does research on food, and he talks about cooking. He also is a musician. So he's a bit of a TikTok influencer in that sense, as we spoke about originally, right? So he's very active on Instagram and all of those things. And what they figured out was that a large percentage of our company, something like 4 or 5% of our workforce, actually follows this one person. So they've been effectively tapping him from time to time. So I think that's an interesting concept you brought on about using internal influencers as well, especially in the age of the talent wars and the recent great resignation and other things we have.
So one of the things that I've observed over the course of my career, and I'm going to date myself with this comment a little bit, because when I started to do digital communications, everyone wanted to know about bloggers and how do we engage the bloggers, right? And then that all evolved to the landscape that we have now. And I think what's really interesting is that is the influence landscape is just such a broad and diverse one. And I think often whether we're on the consulting side of things or whether we're internal and we're advising our stakeholders internally, there always seems to be this desire to find the silver bullet, right? And there just isn't one. And I think I've had instances in over the course of my career on the agency side where we've had people come and you know, oh, we need to, that like, it was a satellite communications company, and we need, please help us get on Facebook. And I'm like, but why do you want to be on Facebook? Because everybody's there. And we're like, no. So very few companies, when I was, and this is on the consulting side of things, very few companies invested in understanding where their audience was, you know, to really understand how to kind of engage. And I think there was just this idea that if a platform was big, that's where you needed to be, without kind of thinking also about whether that was where your audience was. And then the other question was the one about the volume over value, right? Whether it was better to be engaging an influencer that was engaging 10 of the most important people that you needed to reach, rather than, you know, hundreds and thousands of people who might not necessarily have any impact. So I think those things have shifted over time. One of the shifts that I've seen that's really interesting, though, is how people moving out of media have then established their own channels, which in the past would have looked like a blog, but are now legit publications, right? So they're digital publications that are run by an ex-journalist who is now, you know, the editor of their own publication, who is one person creating content for that whole production. And I think that has changed the way we engage as well, because that one person cannot create all of the content. And so it has changed the way brands engage with somebody like that. They come with all of the credibility of the ex-journalist, the ex-editor, but they now have the constraints of being one man producing an entire platform for themselves. And there is a way that we can work with them. And there are many ways in which we can work with them. And that's made the whole influencer engagement model just completely change and be dynamic. And I think the second point on this is also just what that influencer looks like. In Japan, for example, we have people involved in the decision-making process of vendors that we work with, who are almost like referral agencies. So they essentially operate in where, you know, I'm thinking of working with a particular vendor. I go to them, they give us a bunch of information on whether or not that potential vendor is credible. And it goes to financials, it goes to your product set, it goes to what, you know, what work you've done and your case studies and things like that. So for me, that is somebody who's not in media, not in your traditional kind of, you know, sphere of influence that you would kind of typically look at, but who is fundamental to decision making. And so once a quarter, I make sure that they have updated information, because these are people that are helping my potential customers essentially make the right decisions. And so I'm essentially making sure they have the latest information, package that together for them. And the final thing in all of this, I think from my perspective, is the voice of the brand and how you're communicating with and through these influencers. That's a piece of work that I don't think is as consistently and committedly done by a lot of brands, is just to understand how it is we communicate as an organization, and therefore where do we spend our time in how that voice can be shared with and through influencers. So we did extensive work with brands that had the time and discipline to do it, to go, where are your competitors? What are they talking about? And where is the opportunity then for you to own a distinct narrative, and then take that into their influencer engagement program to deliver authentic value to the influencers that you're engaging. So you're not just adding to the noise, but you are a distinct and defensible voice in a particular topic and area. So for me, that's kind of the evolution that I've seen over time with the way that we engage influencers. And in some ways, we have come very far. And in some ways, some of our fundamentals still need to be addressed.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Karen. And thanks, everyone. Really good comments there. Just so, Abhinav, you talked about just the range of different types of people, including running influencers, which I guess, you know, might raise a few eyebrows. I've actually seen the Digital Heart, I think, by the way. I think it was at the New York Marathon Expo, if I'm not mistaken. So, and then the buying process has become more complex. Keith, you talked about things like advisory boards, tech evangelists. The B2C scale doesn't apply from what we, from the answers, I think. So the kind of traditional micro, mid, macro celebrity seems less relevant. Employees, Mickey, you mentioned, which we're very keen to talk more about, because I think probably all aware how important employees are when it comes to building influence. Potentially bring some risks as well. Talk about that. Internal influencers, Abhinav, you also talked about that too. Quite interesting to hear that there's a list, which in terms of which of your employees have huge influence. And then Carolyn, yeah, I think the rise of, I don't know if you'd call them substackers, but just, the people who sometimes have a really outsized influence, compared to the scale of their operation. It's quite a different thing. So I wonder, we can go in a few different ways. I definitely want to make sure we have enough time to talk about metrics and KPIs. We're talking about ROI. And I think it'd be really interesting if we can talk about employees as well. But before that, I wonder if maybe if we could just, in terms of the influencers you're working with, are there kind of specific criteria that are in place, or should there be specific criteria when you're talking about how you identify and select the right influencers for your campaigns?
So perhaps I can start. I personally find it extremely challenging to find a good influencer. So even when you want to work in a vertical. So the first one is to find the influencer that would be ethically and compliant with our sourcing policy, because at 3M we're extremely ethical. So we go through that extremely tedious, which is great, but which is quite long exercise of actually vetting every single supplier that we have, and an influencer is definitely a supplier. The second thing is it is extremely difficult to manage the influencer. I don't know if you had that, but we have actually witnessed influencer who just bails out. Like they sign a contract, they agree, but I don't know, their audience is not in agreement with us. So they decide, to put pressure, and obviously the influencer have to actually step back, right? So I think it is my belief that it is very, very difficult to do that without an agency. I think there is a critical need if you want to Carolyn's point around, like the quality, to align the quality of your content, right? To have that, like consistent voice. You also need, it is impossible to have one internal marketer trying to actually control of this. And I think it is far easier and far more efficient to use a proper agency that can actually monitor the activity of the influencer, also change, and it's far more agile to actually hire an agency altogether if we have the means, because that's another cost that you have to add into this. I think one of the things that I definitely look into when I look into the influencer is the usual, the proven track record within the industry, the deeply engaged audience, like how much engagement they get, because this is what I can see from their profile, but I think one of the things that is very important for me, and maybe it resonates with you because with you all, because you're all from like subsidiaries of headquarters in the US, for instance, local resonance. I think because in my global role right now, we tend to want to we tend to not to see the importance of I don't know how to say, but there's not a one size fits all kind of influencer thing. And I think we really forget about, like that local resonance of the influencer. We tend to, very much like media, select a media or select an influencer that we think can actually kind of talk across all countries, and actually it just doesn't work. And for me, it is one of the major concerns that I have when we have marketers. So we have more centralized marketers today, and that local relevance is actually kind of forgotten. So I think, yes, it is around, alignment with your values and your objectives, but it is also about, the relevance within the context that you are in. So for instance, I'm in the Middle East, and you understand that the person who will be actually talking to my market will be very, very much different from someone who will be speaking in Brussels or someone who will be speaking in Japan. So that's kind of my perspective on when we choose the right influencer. I want an agency that understands this and helps us, like kind of touch, like the audience where they are.
Yeah, Arun, I'll make a quick comment. I think from, when you're looking at an influencer, right? I mean, and the value they bring to your strategy. To us, there are kind of two fundamental points of value, right? First is their, you could call it endorsement value, right? Which is the authority of their voice, which they bring, which lends credibility to your product or your cause or whatever you're engaging them for, right? That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, their reach. And in terms of their reach, is both the size of their reach and their ability to tap in new audiences which you as an organization may not yet have a reach with, right? So that I think is important. But also within this whole thing is an evaluation of the risk. So if you're engaging with an influencer, you are in a sense bringing them under your brand umbrella. So before we engage anyone, we do Mickey said, with the agency partners, etc., we do a full evaluation of that influencer and the risk they could potentially pose. Right? Are they erratic with their voice? Apart from this cause, which they may be strong on, are there other causes they're representing which may be out of harmony with our own brand and what we our value systems, etc., all of that. So that I think is absolutely crucial. I think at times when companies jump in and engage influencers just looking at the size of their reach without doing that fitment of are they in harmony with their brand, product, and their corporate ethos, that's when things can often even go wrong. Even if they make a conscious decision, I think at some time you have to make a very considered decision. That, I mean, the examples are replete, right? The most probably the largest one over last year was listed venture which InBev went on in engaging an influencer to promote one of their beer brands, but it backfiring in a big way because in a sense their consumers felt very divided about their opinions on that influencer and what they represented, right? So I think you have to take a very considered decision on it. Much more in B2B, much more in B2B. I think in B2C, you already work with a range of whatever, brand ambassadors, other things, this thing. And you're used to doing this on a natural level in that assessment. I think in B2B companies, if they're starting to do this, getting into this game, you can easily also get it quite wrong. So I think that risk element is important.
Yeah, and I think because of the risk, certainly my organization, we're very eager to learn, we're very eager to experiment, but it's step by step on how you sort of engage with this new set of vendors, right? We're talking about them as vendors, right? In terms of the risk that they become into your brand and so on. I think with one of the things here is it's there's a lot of kind of upside in terms of amplification. And so go back to what Mickey was saying around employee advocacy, that really does advocate your brand, and we did kind of highlight that obviously there's risks there too, but at least they're already part of your organization, already part of your brand, right? I think the challenge is then again the point that Mickey brought up in terms of the relevance. So you can amplify, then you have to zoom back in. And we were talking earlier that there's not, very eloquently, Abhinav said he's 20,000 people influencing essentially his, their sales, right? Or will decide on their sales. You got to be very zoomed in and very relevant very quickly. And so that sort of, I get and I see it's kind of easy. We can go to this person like a journalist or like an ex-journalist or a tech evangelist, wherever it is, and amplify. But is that amplification really improving the stickiness and engagement of the message that will lead to business. And that's where, so from a brand point of view, there's upside, but from a further down the funnel, getting to the buying decision, it's harder to see that connection, and then harder to justify budget spend towards an influencer to lead to sales, when there's probably other ways that we could be amplifying the brand and amplifying our message that are more understood and easier to execute. So
Yeah.
that's where my head is at.
I think when we were doing this, you know, again, more from the consulting side of things, the appetite to maintain dynamic lists of like who these influencers were and to kind of keep revisiting them, that's also a big part of like of it, because that requires resource, whether that is an internal person tracking what people are talking about, or the metrics against which you measure their influence, or whether that's an agency partner that you engage to do that for you. You know, there must be a sort of cadence to revisiting all of this. In the early days of this, from the B2C side, what we learned was how quickly, you know, a tech influencer could become a food blogger, because you know that changed, and in Singapore, one of the top tech influencers then became, you know, more of a social and political commentator over time. And so, you know, so that sort of meant that, you know, he then dropped off the lists for particular vendors that we were working with who were very focused only on talking about tech. But also within that master narrative that you have, the sub narratives, and whether that means that if you are a tech company, actually there's this person, you know, who's talking about fintech, whose narrative kind of intersects. So some of these things might not be as intuitive as it seems, and I think, to Mickey's point, definitely having agency partners who can, you know, maintain that pulse for you is important. But also internally, having the appetite to keep revisiting this. And I think getting the buy-in internally is a big part of it as well, because I think, you know, there's not a lot of people within the organization that will understand stakeholder engagement in the way that those of us that practice it every day do. And so, you know, there's always this caution that the big bad sort of, you know, wolves of you know, being out there and people whose narratives we can't manage as such, you know, that is a big part of being able to manage an effective program as well, and who you engage as an influencer, because you have to satisfy everyone internally before you do this, that it isn't going to go pear-shaped at some point. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I think you have to have the stomach for that level of dynamism before you even engage at all.
I agree. There's a reason why I went last, because this is something that we, in terms of influencer selection, this is something that we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's interesting that each of you are mentioning like slightly different things, and that's the whole beauty of influence, is it takes a different form for different people. I'm gonna hopefully structure this in kind of advice for any listeners as well. The first thing I would say is you start with strategy and brand alignment. A lot of people start with influencers. A lot of people start with looking down their feed and seeing who they like or who they follow. That's not the right place to start. You have to think brand strategy first and brand alignment. That's things like they have the brand values, the authentic experience in that space. Also, the authentic usability of your business. Yes, we can partner with influencers that we haven't partnered with yet or are not customers. That plays a role, but the reputation and the credibility of what they're saying is so much stronger if they already know your business and have worked with you. Proven track record of success, consistency of messaging in the space. Are they a vocal communicator, a narrator consistently? They have partnerships with potential media outlets that we can leverage. Elements like this that you can match up. What you can do as a brand is develop a scoring system. A lot of those things are subjective. Is their voice credible? How often do they talk, that sort of thing? What we advise and help brands with is creating a scoring system that, particularly with global brands, different markets, different departments pick different types of influencers. develop a consistent scoring system so you can overall assess the strength of an influencer. But secondly, most importantly, really, everything needs to be rooted in data and vetting, right? So before we do all this, we conduct audience and social listening analysis. So, and we have a tech platform that allows us to do this. It's made up of a couple of different softwares that, and we call the combination Influence O. But it looks at, firstly, audience data. So it looks behind the business influencer. It looks at, yes, how many followers they have, where in the world they are, but it looks at their industry, at their job title, at their levels. Then it looks at the social listening alignment. What are they talking about? It aligns it with your point, Carolyn, the white space in the industry. What do our audience want to hear about? What isn't saturated? And aligning an influencer's authentic point of view with our hopefully targeted messaging. So yeah, it's developing all of that. That then goes down. We then go down into the final level, which is assessing the network map. So these platforms. So we partner with LinkedIn. We partner with a company called Analytica. We partner with Creator IQ. All of these are influencer-specific businesses that allow you to do this analysis. And looking at that network map, ensuring that we know the influencer that we're working with is partnered or is connected to that ultimate decision maker. Regardless of the big mass appeal that they have, we need to make sure that those those handful of decision makers are within that. So yeah, there's a strict guideline and list that we would follow. And to Miki's point, it's making sure that you don't just give them a task and let them run wild. You assess what they're doing day to day. You analyze that conversation. You advise them on how to communicate. Are they open to that? Is all a part of it. And then the final thing is long-term partnerships. Long-term partnerships just add so much more credibility to what we're doing. Our audience is way too smart to accept or just accept an influencer for what they're saying if it's a one-off partnership. They can see through that. They see they're being paid for it, and it reduces its credibility. Work with long-term partners and people that align to your brand values. That's where you get the real strength.
I'd like to ask a question there, James, because do you think, like, because I feel that the appetite for sponsored content partnerships, things like that, I don't feel that we have the same bias that we had before about that sort of thing. And and please correct me if I'm wrong. I'd genuinely like to know whether audiences still have a bias against content that appears to have been paid for.
I think it's a good question. I think this is one of the big differences between B2B and B2C. I think in the B2C space, and because we're all used to influencers on our social channels holding up a product and saying how much they love this toothpaste, and knowing that they're not really real, obviously lacks credibility. In the B2B space, however, if you're partnering with the right people, the thought leaders, the KOLs that you're working with, their whole reputation and their whole business success rides on what they say and rides on them having credibility in their voice. I think that alone is a reassurance for most people in the B2B space that what they're saying is credible. But also there's that added reassurance that, particularly with the stronger influencers, their network have been seeing them, following them for months, years, decades, sometimes. So they can trust in the voice that what they're saying is true, but they will notice if that varies from their natural content. So I think it's less. I think people do trust the voice, but they're very quick to call out anything that's not true.
Just one thought related to that trust aspect, and just as you were talking, James, one of the things that I've kind of over the last sort of 10, maybe 15 years, I've noticed is the erosion of trade media, and how trade media is becoming a little bit less trusted, and is actually quite transactional in a way, whereby to get coverage, your favorite, if you're sponsored or if you're advertising, And I'm just wondering if you know, are we just seeing a changing of the guard, so to speak? Because we were mentioning a lot about the sort of the stack generation. Carolyn had mentioned, and the kind of evolution from bloggers to now. It's kind of the place where people go for sources of trusted information is changing.
And I don't think that has ever changed throughout the history of time. There's always an evolution of what platforms are trusted, what people are trusted, what media is trusted. I think the easy answer is I think they all play their specific roles in our communication strategies. It's not one's always better than the other. Different platforms and different influences align to different objectives, and that's why that objective alignment and brand value alignment is the most important part of that strategy. But it's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, that's probably one for the floor.
I have another question based on what Keith just said about trusted information. What is your take, James, on AI-powered influencer marketing? Do you use it in your agency? Is this a technology that you think is too, is it too early, or is it something that you have actually already implemented when you actually support your customers? Because obviously I'm very interested, because for PR it has been quite self-evident that it's part of our everyday life, but I was just wondering from an agency perspective, in the selection of those influencers, do you actually use them? Do you use those kind of technologies?
Yeah, I think it will become more and more part of what we're doing. I think it's something that we're integrating more as both on multiple levels. One, the selection process, automating that, putting those criteria in place that can automatically align and give us a brand value or brand score. Virtual influencers, we have not a lot of people understand them or even believe in them right now, but there are certain cases. I mean, you mentioned healthcare, right? So that, take healthcare for an example. We have a big healthcare client that focuses on vaccines and diseases, particularly in Asia Pacific. A lot of these conversations are a little bit taboo, difficult to speak about. We have cases where we've built virtual influencers and AI influencers to be able to communicate with our audience in a way that they don't want to communicate with real people because of that taboo. We then build up those profiles and influencers, now have millions of followers. And that's a nice way of integrating how AI is helping us. So yeah, multiple ways. I think we may have been discussing this, but one thing is worth mentioning as well is the other side of the benefits of AI in influence. So one thing Ogilvy's always been very, very good at is pioneering the protection and the ethical practices within this space. And last year we launched something called the AI Accountability Act, when I'm sure we all know, I think the stat is 40% of people now can't tell an AI image versus a real image. That does cause potential problems or issues for our audiences, not being able to test, not being able to trust what's real and what's not having a real sense of what reality is and distorting that version of reality. So we launched the AI Accountability Act to encourage brands and agencies to disclose when AI is being used, to make sure that we maintain that sense of what's real, which is a really, really important part of that AI conversation. But yeah, there's multiple ways that AI is being used in influence, and it's only going to become a bigger part of what we're doing.
So we've got just under 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure we do talk about metrics and KPIs. Keith, in your comment, you talked about, yes, there's all the upside in terms of amplification, but is it engaging and is it driving buying decisions? Carolyn, you also talked about how important internal buy-in is, and presumably that's also related to the return on investment that can be demonstrated. So what are we all employing, and what should we be employing, I guess, when it comes to measuring the return on investment of these B2B influencer marketing initiatives. Is it the same as traditional B2B marketing metrics? And I mean, are we talking about the whole funnel or just talking about specific segments? Keen to hear more.
Yeah, first thought would be go back to basics. It's what's the strategy? What are you trying to do? So if you are trying to use B2B influencers to amplify or grow your brand, increase your reach new audiences, then you apply the metrics to that. I would question whether there maybe, it's a tactic within other tactics that maybe are proven and more effective. And so that's kind of where my head is at in terms of why we haven't gone full scale on anything like this, as well as ethical issues. So that's one part of it. Then the real value to, as we're working in B2B marketing, is ultimately we're trying to drive sales. So and like a lot of other B2B marketing techniques, it's harder to show that line to sales, right? There are ways, but it's harder to show the line. And a lot of that comes through, the source of your lead and how that's guided through your CRM system, essentially, right? Generally. So I'll pause there, but that's sort of my main thought is it's got to be based on why you're doing it in the first place.
Can I add a few stats to just get the thought starters going for everybody? Because this was a big part of the research that we did. Because influence is typically thought of as that awareness top of funnel, reaching the audiences. Whereas a lot of the CMOs that we interviewed and surveyed, 50% of people actually said they were using influencers at that mid-funnel relationship building stage, because of the authentic human relationship you can build. And then another 50% said they're using influencers at final ROI sales funnel stage, which changed perceptions a little bit around just using influencers at that awareness stage. Another thing to take out of it was ROI is now more visible through influencer marketing than it's ever been. There was a stat that 43% of people surveyed said that the main benefit that they got from influencer marketing was warmer leads or an increased volume of leads as the biggest success factor they had. Considering all the other metrics that you can target, warmer leads being 43% is a huge stat. And the final thing I'll leave you with for this section, I want to add some more stuff, but I'll finish here. The way people are driving ROI is very different in different regions for different types of businesses and different industries. One of the quotes that stand out, because I face-to-face interviewed a lot of the CMOs myself, and one of the CMOs, Rebecca Hurst from EY, CMO of EY, said the way they measure influencers or the success of influencers and ROI is who they get in a room, how many people they get in a room, and how many conversations and relationships they start from bringing people into a room with an influencer. They know them themselves are not as big a draw as EY plus a couple of industry experts. So that helps them bring people into the room. From that, they can then assess, they know out of 10 people in a room, they're going to have one very strong lead, which will convert into minimum viable spend. There's a couple of ways that people integrate. We'd love to hear what other people are thinking in terms of their ROI metrics.
Yeah, I think the contact. Oh, go ahead, Abhinav. Sorry.
Thanks, Mickey. I think a couple of quick points for me, right? I think when you look at influencer marketing and communications, I don't believe it needs a different set of KPI or measures, right? It's just at least that's how we see it. It's a tactic, or it's a channel which you use, but the returns you're going to get for it needs to feed into what is your standard KPIs and what you're looking to do with your brand, and in terms of whatever your objectives as a business, right? So in that sense, also what we hear from James, it is about that. I think the second thing is in B2B, since we're specifically discussing that. Depending on which industry or area in, it might be a little different. On consumer, you're talking about it earlier, right? It's the influencer picking up that toothpaste. Often it is very bottom of the funnel. And it's very measurable in the sense you're hiring an influencer to endorse your product, whatever. It could be in a podcast, could be in an ad, could be in social. And then you're creating a clear call to action to go somewhere and purchase that product, right? And you're able to then measure that actually directly into what part of your sales came in through that channel. I think in B2B it's complex. In our industry, it's complex because buying cycles along. There's multiple touches which go on inside the buying cycle. So it's a question of attribution. Whatever we do, right? One piece of communication, one product brochure, one meeting with a customer at an event is not what led to the sale. But typically, say in our business, between connecting with a potential new customer through whatever channel they came in through web or social or a quick meeting or whatever, till them doing business with us, often there are 13 or 14 touch points, right? So for us, if the influencer is one of these touch points, it just flows into the attribution model which we are using. So we may not measure it very differently. It's inside the what we're doing anyways as an organization.
So
Vicky, go
I
ahead.
used to love, yeah, so I used to love a good spreadsheet. I'm like I'm Asian, and I work for 3M, so we like everything that is called A3 bowlers, dashboard that really talks to our executives. And to be honest, when I was going to an executive operation committee every month, I would actually blind them with my numbers, which in the hope that they wouldn't see, like marketing as a cost center. To be honest, and it breaks my heart to admit this, but it never changed the entire narratives, right? So I think going back to what James, stepping back and going back to what James was saying about around strategy, it's really around what is the strategy that you're trying to achieve at which place in the funnel. I think Abhinav, you actually mentioned that you are, and it is also how we should also select, like your influencer too, right? What are you trying to achieve? So are you trying to drive some kind of awareness around the product? So am I trying to drive some kind of awareness? So am I at the top of the funnel and trying to drive awareness around what glass bubbles are, right? Like, or, like, am I trying to engage, like the content? So am I trying to create some kind of understanding of the product or enabling the people with the product? So we could use webinars for this. We do that a lot in scientific affairs in healthcare, but also with our R&D people who are applications engineer, right? What can we do? Especially during COVID, we had that a lot because we couldn't do demos one-to-one. So we had to actually use digital means. And the question was, how do we engage, and which influencers should we engage to actually enable other people online? And of course, like what kind of conversion are you trying to do? So if you're trying to sell, right, I think in scientific affairs, you need a dentist who use your products, who can actually, like sell, like your, I don't know, your aligners or your, and actually tells you why it is easier, right? Those are kind of the influencer that you're looking really into. So I think I just wanted to say that because what James was saying around you actually select your influencer based on your strategy actually really resonated. So that's the thing around the funnel that Abhinav mentioned. I think there is another consideration that we actually have to have is what is your message at corporate level, at business level? I don't think any of us use it at operational level. It's going to be mainly internal stakeholders, so it's not going to be that interesting. So at corporate level, what is the kind of message that we're catering? So your KPI will be very different, right? Like as your, I think EY person, a CMO, I think, like you would actually look at the type of, the quality of the people you're engaging. So in sustainability, was I able to actually engage with someone like Sanda Ojambo from the UNGC, right? So those are kind of things that we will probably consider because we think that is important. But when you actually talk at business level, which is more sales orientated, I think the metrics will be the normal B2B influencer marketing type of, or B2B KPI. So what is your lead to sales? What is your return on marketing investment? We actually do it based on AVE, right? So we do we have a calculation where we have our AVE on top, and then, you know, we put, you know, like how much it costed, and then the number of time it actually returns, because what I learned across the year is anything that doesn't have a dollar sign doesn't resonate with executives, right? So when you are part of the executive committee, you just need to talk their language and say, well, this is how much it costs, this is how much it contributes, this is how much I saved. So I think it really depends on who you talk to. We also kind of value something called the earned media value that you may be using. I think it's important. Last month, we actually generated $65,000 in one post based on, you know, like employee engagement only. Like it was one employee posting on something that has an incredible followership. Now it actually spinned off, so now it went with the company was spinned off, but it was quite powerful because you can actually really calculate, you know, how much, you know, like you can actually generate, and $65,000 of saving, I think, is for all of us something really great. And of course, you know, like perhaps one of the things that is underrated is the engagement of the rate, and when you can measure it, you know, like the number of shares that your post have. And that, going back to the employee advocacy part again, is easier to control and have access to than if you actually hire, you know, like an external entity. So that's kind of what my 2 cents are. Yeah.
Picking up from what Mickey said, I think one of the challenges from all of this is to build the appetite internally for diverse and dynamic metrics. Because if we are going to, you know, adopt a model that looks at things more from a campaign or intent-centric, you know, perspective, then we are not going to have the same metrics every single time. And for the decision makers and the purse keepers, you know, that's not always something that's easy for them to kind of wrap their heads around or accept, because they want to, well, what did we do last year on this? And, you know, and then how do we compare that year on year? So I think that's part of building the success of influencer programs in the organization, as well as being able to develop the appetite for this kind of dynamism, and with the metrics as well, is to probably have that baseline, and, you know, which is I guess, you know, financially, perhaps that's the baseline, the dollars to dollars. But then on top of that, what are we looking at? I think about like an instance where so when Microsoft did this, when they unveiled Satya as the new CEO, they had an employee, instead of going and doing the whole media kind of blitz, they started it by having an employee interview Satya on campus and just walk through the campus with him, asking him questions about who he was. And the authenticity of that, and the authenticity in the way that Satya was presented in that's something that's very, very difficult to kind of put a finger on, and to kind of say, well, if he had done Forbes, the cover of Forbes, would, you know, how would that have stacked up? You know, sometimes these are not apples for apples comparisons either, but that was an incredibly powerful way to introduce a CEO. Hadn't been done that way before, and had leveraged someone internal, you know, in order to achieve that as well. It's a very different form of employee engagement than we'd seen to that point for a start.
One other sort of thought, it goes back to the assumptions again, James, on what is a B2B influencer. I mean, if we're talking about paid influencers versus non-paid, because the Ernst & Young example to me, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it kind of strikes as the classic sort of relationship selling. And, you know, there's obviously, like our salespeople would be engaging multiple influencers all the time, right? We've got co-opetition, we've got associations, we've got, you know, people who we'd form a deal together with, and everyone's sort of mingling at the cocktail party and bringing in different people at different points. So that's where I get sort of confused on how do I measure the real influence of B2B influencers, or the real return from B2B influencers as it gets closer to the sale. I definitely agree with Abhinav, is that there's, you know, if you can measure, you know, the paid influencer, or that's the cleanest way, or a paid influencer touched these set of people within this organization, which influenced the sale, I think you could do that as part of one of the tactics. But so that's kind of where I'm still struggling with the B2B, what a B2B influencer is. I know we've been talking quite, the more I think about it, the more confused I get.
Mhm.
No, I was hoping, I think the plan was you'd be less confused after this roundtable. So.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think we might be at the Nike moment for influencers, right? Like the Nike point of everyone's an athlete, everyone's an influencer. I think some of your former journalists, I think Carolyn was talking about that, right? I think that moment of journalists becoming influencers, that's definitely there. I'll share one example from our side. So our sort of foremost client gathering every year, we do this series called the TCS Summit. So there's one edition of this in every region across the world, in which we gather about 200 to 300 of our top clients in that region for a 2-day affair. So the one which we've been doing in the US, so we put a lot of thinking behind who do we want to bring in as speakers, and often in that the consideration is exactly this: who do these people want to hear from? Who do they respect? Who has influence on them? Which then, if we get them in as a speaker, that gets these people to come in for these clients to say, oh yes, I'll take that invite. I'll definitely come to your event. And one interesting thing is, so the last couple of editions of the US one, the main host for the event, we contracted David Pogue. You may have heard of him. He's a famous technology journalist, New York Times, etc. So he speaks a lot about consumer tech, enterprise tech. So he's been hosting that event, and at that event, he's like he says, in New York, I'm just a guy on the metro, and I'm a journalist and whatever, right? So somebody learns I'm a journalist, I don't necessarily get that much respect. At that event, he's a superstar. There are all these chief information officers who are just trying to grab and saying, please, can I get a selfie with you, David, and things like that. So definitely, I think that moment has come for journalists to be influencers. On the lighter side, in that theme of everyone's an influencer, our youngest and smallest member of our family, so our canine friend, was pitched by a dog food company a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, you've been consuming our dog food. Can you send us pictures of her eating it and her playing after that and stuff, and we'll put it on our Instagram. So
Oh, wow.
Apart from AI influencers, we also have canine influencers.
So you're like an influencer talent manager now as well. All right, we've got we've covered a lot of ground, but honestly, it feels like there's so much more we could discuss in this area, and I'm kind of amazed the time has flown by. So we've got less than 10 minutes, and obviously, we've discussed a lot, I think, on this conversation in terms of what is B2B influence and who are B2B influencers, what are the kind of selection criteria, how has that changed, and how difficult is it? The metrics and KPIs that are being used, the role of AI and technology, and I think the importance of employees. So perhaps to conclude, if I could ask each of you to just perhaps provide a kind of a short piece of advice in terms of how would you advise people that are, either reading the story or tuning in to this, if it's a podcast or a video, how would you advise them in terms of their B2B influencer marketing efforts? And you can be as broad or as specific as you'd like to be. Does anyone want to go first?
I'll go. I think for me it's about using these partnerships to do what you can't, and whether that means you can't because you don't have the resources or you're in whatever way constrained, right? So sometimes within the organization there are restrictions on what we can achieve, especially in content creation, right? And I think this is where then working with an influencer who might bring some great outside in thinking into the different ways in which content can be shaped, formed, delivered, I think these are the ways that we kind of get the best value out of those relationships, which is just use them to do the things that you can't because you're limited in some way.
Similar kind of thought. For me, it's rethink B2B influence and what it does. but be very careful on making sure you're planning and asking why you are doing it in order to find new ways to unlock, better business outcomes.
So I'll go next. I think for me, I'm quite partial to micro influencers. So I would say don't neglect your current customer base because sometimes your best influencer might just exist within your happy customer pool. So you can look at brand advocates, I know that some of our customers have maybe it's not incredible for you, but when I see someone with 30,000 followers on LinkedIn, I always find it quite impressive. So I don't know the value of all that network connection, but I think it's quite influential. And also, I would say don't exclude the idea of building your own stars and prioritize long-term relationship. By that, I mean, of course, we talked about employees, but at 3M, we have something called America Top Scientists, which is kind of a competition where our scientists, because we're a science-based company, actually mentor, young future scientists and actually walk them through a project and how, they actually have to create the project and make it a reality. And after that, they actually can go into an award. And one of them actually became a Time Magazine 2020 Kid of the Year. The name is Gitanjali Rao. And when you actually build your own influencers, they also become already bought into your brand. So you start them young too, but also as they grow, as the greatest scientists that they're actually going to be, you also grow your reputation. So how should I call it? Your contact with your influencer doesn't end on the day you actually finalize a sale or whatever you wanted to achieve with them, but it evolves a long way as the person also involved. So that's pretty much what my 2 cents would be around
Great,
B2B
thanks.
influence marketing.
Yeah, excellent advice from all of you. So,
I'd go with I think to businesses who are new in the game, looking at considering this area, I said there's probably a 3-step process they need to go through. The first step is have the clarity on what you want to achieve with it, right? I think Carolyn said it very eloquently, which is use this to achieve what you can't do yourself otherwise, right? So be very clear on what's your business objective, why are you going in for this tactic? Not because it's a trend, but it's really what do you expect to achieve out of it? The second step is to really do that hard work on knowing your audience and doing that research on what really influences them or what do they look up to and other things, right? So based on which you'll be able to produce a list of people who meet that criteria. And then the third step, which James also spoke about earlier, which is then a proper vetting of these to see of this list of people who influence your audiences, how many of them sort of meet that filter of the brand alignment and fitness with your organization and voice fitment and other things. And only kind of when you've gone through this do you sort of get into the game, right? And the last piece is, of course, measuring success, because this is in a way a relatively newer category. That point on, then if you're making that investment, you need to justify that investment. So yeah, I think just a very considered approach like that is what makes sense for someone to do.
Sure. James, you get the final word.
Cool. Okay, a couple of things from my side. The first thing I would remind new strategists in the space is influence. Well, remember, influence can play a role at every stage of the funnel, from awareness to relationship building, down to sales, and even after the sales has happened. We didn't talk about this, but influencers play a really important role in helping our clients understand our products more, especially in B2B, where products can always be complex. Influencers play a role in that retention revenue as well. So think all the way through the funnel. The second thing is think bigger than content. It's really easy to think about influencers as content generators for social media, but on interviewing these CMOs, integration is a huge value. So think about different ways that you can utilize them. That could be bring them to a sales meeting to impress a prospective client, bring them to your R&D workshops so that industry experience can benefit the products or services that you're building. Have them come talk to your employees to motivate them or educate them. Think about those value added benefits that will add more brand advocacy than any short-term sale will ever give you. And the final thing I thought I would mention that I haven't spoken on yet is the point around what Mickey said around employee advocacy. It was probably the single biggest thing that CMOs mentioned that was undervalued or underutilized. There's an amazing stat from LinkedIn that says your combined network of all of your employees is on average 10 times larger than your brand audience itself. If you're not using that huge network, untapped network, you're missing a massive opportunity. That is largely free if you understand how to communicate through your employees better. So yeah, developing that employee advocacy is a really important strategy.
Excellent, brilliant advice. And yeah, really interesting conversation. Thanks, everyone. I guess this B2B roundtable is itself a form of B2B influence. And how meta is that? Thank you so much all for your time today.